Townsend Harris High School. Um, so both institutions, Barnard being a small liberal arts institution affiliated with Columbia, and Townsend Harris being a school known for its rigorous humanities curriculum, have really emphasized writing. And I think through my experiences both at Townsend Harris, where I was managing editor of the school's newspaper, and also at Barnard, where I've involved myself in writing in various disciplines, whether scientific writing, or non-scientific writing. I've really strengthened my written skills, and through also working at Queller Prep, I think working with students for whether it's ACT, SAT, resumes, academic assignments that involve writing, or assignments for really any type of writing. I think through that I've kind of really learned and developed my own skills as a writer, and I would definitely be more than happy to help anyone else with those skills as well. So that's kind of a short background about me. If you have any questions or would like to get in touch, feel free to um, contact Frances, and she will arrange that accordingly. And if anyone has any questions, they can feel free to pop them in the chat now, since we have a small group. But if not, I can also start talking about the Common App prompts and really dissect what admissions officers may be looking for, or what are some good tips to have in mind when thinking about these prompts. Okay. So I don't see anything in the chat as of yet. So I'm going to start by going through the Common App prompts. So to begin with, the Common App gives you a variety of prompts where they really hope for you to really choose a prompt that speaks the most to you. So as you can see, there are 7 prompts, and the 7th one actually asks you to share an essay on any topic of your choice. It can be one. So to begin with, I think there are some things that students may or may not know when approaching these prompts. I think these prompts are broad enough for any student to share um, a variety of their experiences, backgrounds, interests, or talents. But at the same time, there are things that are recommended not to really include in the Common App. So anything that may be controversial or may be interpreted in a way that is controversial by an admissions officer, likely it's best to omit that. Um, Examples may include extremely strong um, political opinions, or extremely strong or traumatic experiences. I think sometimes students really almost consider the Common App as a personal essay, but at the same time, it's important to keep in mind the audience that is reading the Common App itself. And so you should always ensure that the subject matter is appropriate for that specific professional audience. So that's kind of the first thing that I would recommend, is that really make sure that the topic that you are choosing is appropriate and suitable for the audience, which is a college admission officer. Secondly, I think it's also important to make use of the word count without necessarily going overboard. So typically, the Common App list is word count, and I believe it is 650 words is the maximum, and I believe that the minimum is 250. Regardless, I think those are simply general ballparks. I don't think it's necessary that students go absolutely to 650. At the same time, I definitely think that that amount of word count is important to consider when planning out the type of essay that you want to write. So if it's 650 words, you should think about how to structure an essay or a story that allows you to make use of that word limit, so you're not um, so you're making use of it without seeming kind of tangential and going off on a tangent, and you're also not extremely concise as well in whatever story that you have to elaborate on. So those are kind of two things that um, I wanted to mention kind of off the bat. And I think something else that's important to consider is that colleges are generally looking for good writing. And good writing is writing that's clear. I think I've seen a lot of students use extremely difficult vocabulary that is not accessible to a reader, and thinking that it demonstrates their intelligence or demonstrates their grasp of the English language. But I think that's a very common misconception. I think it's important to make sure that your first goal should really be clarity, making sure that someone can understand what you're saying. And that's really the foundation of your essay, and everything else is kind of the cherry on top. Um, and so I think the first thing is to make sure that a student has good writing that is clear, understandable. I think secondly is this concept called voice. And what voice really is the ability to express yourself. And I think that may look different for each individual. Some people kind of adopt a really personal and kind of really intimate voice, whereas others have still more of a far further removed tone. But I think both are still voice, and I think the best voice is the one that's yours. So you shouldn't force your essay to be to sound a certain way or be a certain way based on what you've heard. Rather, whatever comes most naturally to you is likely what is going to sound the most natural to other individuals. So kind of, I think generally these are tips that I think apply to all of the prompts. Making sure that you are ensuring clarity, making sure you're choosing a prompt that in itself is appropriate, and the answer to the prompt that you have is also appropriate. um, and furthermore, um, I think it's important to make sure that the voice that you're using and what you're saying really reflects you as an individual as well. So if nobody has any questions, we can kind of dissect the prompts as well. So the first prompt is: some students have a background, identity, interest, or talent that is so meaningful they believe their application would be incomplete without it. If this sounds like you, then please share your story. So I think what's evident is that um, again, this prompt is extremely broad, but what that means is that they're really giving you the space to really talk about anything that can apply to this. And I think what's also important to remember is that these prompts do not necessarily represent necessarily kind of boundaries in which your writing has to be within. I think as long as your writing addresses the prompt in some way, it doesn't need to exactly match the prompt, but it obviously needs to have some sort of relationship to it. I think that's also fine. So the goal of these prompts is really not to limit your creativity, but rather to give you a guiding or thinking question. Um, so I think that's really important to consider, is that really look at the prompts as an open-ended question that you can use in order to write an essay. So again, to reiterate, I think the first prompt is really for a student to really point out something that is significant to them. Now, this background, identity, interest, or talent does not necessarily have to be something extremely rare or something extremely unique. Rather, it's important that the background, identity, interest, or talent that you choose is indeed meaningful, and you do have a way to indicate that it's meaningful through a specific experience. That's what really makes these essays the most memorable. When you have a specific memory or specific experience that has impacted you in some way, and you're able to go back and reflect on it through this essay. So that's kind of the first prompt. The second prompt is: the lessons we take from obstacles we encounter can be fundamental to later success. Recount a time when you faced a challenge, setback, or failure. How did it affect you, and what did you learn from the experience? So, something that's key to this prompt, and I think again, this kind of applies to all of them, is you want to ensure that you're choosing a topic that is also not extremely cliche. So obviously this is an academic audience, this is an academic essay, and you are using this essay to apply to colleges. That does not mean that your Common App needs to be restricted solely to academic involvements or pursuits. For example, someone can write about their essay for number two as being and they can state that a failure or challenge may be a specific class that they took or a specific standardized test. And while that may be true, it really isn't necessarily something that's unique or something that really will stay with someone after they read the essay, because it is something that is quite common in terms of the audience that is reading this. For example, the audience that is reading this is a college admissions officer, and it's likely that they have multiple aspects of your college application, which includes your transcript, possibly your resume, letters of recommendation, so on and so forth. So I think the Common App is really a space for you to indicate qualities about you or skills about you that may not be reflected in other parts of your application. So, for example, writing about a class that you struggled with isn't necessarily something that is worth writing your Common App on, because they can possibly see that reflected in your transcript. Furthermore, you also have the additional information section. So something as significant as that, um, as struggling with a class, or something personal that may have challenged or set back you or put you to some sort of failure, may be more appropriate for that section. So for the second prompt, I think this is really, again, another open-ended prompt that's asking you to really reflect on something that you may not have necessarily seen as a challenge or setback or failure before, but something that you now can reflect on and can understand why that was a challenge, and and how it affected you. And I think this is something that is, significant in this prompt, but also generally. Anytime someone asks you for a challenge in a professional setting, um, in this case, it's a Common App. Sometimes, often, it's interviews, whether they're for higher education or for jobs. Anytime people ask you about a challenge or obstacle that you face, they also expect you to indicate how you have grown from that challenge and what you've learned from it. So I think it's important to really make sure that you're including that in this question and in this application, and in this prompt, indicating that this was a challenge that you faced and it genuinely did give you a difficult time, but um, you still were able to come out of that challenge as a stronger individual, whether that's in the form of a stronger student or just a stronger person. Um, so someone messaged me and asked me if talking about a a death or a car crash be too personal to discuss in an essay. Um, and I would say that it really, first of all, I'm not really sure if you wanted me to address this with the group. Unfortunately, I just can't answer questions individually, but obviously, I will keep you anonymous. So, in regards to the question about whether talking about a death or car crash be too personal, my response to that is it really depends on the way that you maneuver that type of discussion. I think that talking about a death that's really impacted you um, may be something that you can write about, because it may be something that is, that may have served as a challenge in your life. At the same time, with things like that, it's important to remember that the focus of the Common App is always you. So, what I've seen some students doing is they talk about um, something significant in their lives, and that may include their parents, or that may include, any individual in their family that may have affected them immensely and their desires for education. But oftentimes, the focus becomes lost, and the focus becomes more so on them than on the student. So it's important that when you're talking about something that is so heavy and full of substance, such as death or a car crash, you want to make sure that the focus of the Common App is still on you, and that the reader is able to get a sense of who you are, and not just um, what this incident was that affected you. Um, and I would also recommend, for things like that, it may also be helpful to have someone just read your essay, just so that you get an idea of what their immediate reactions are as a reader. Because sometimes I think when we're writing, we're in this mindset, we're in this zone, and that zone is very different um, than what a reader may feel when they're reading our Common App essay. So I think it's helpful to always have a reader. It can be a friend, it can be a tutor, it really can be anyone, but it's just good to have someone give you their genuine reactions to your writing. Someone asked, what do you think about students writing about the challenges due to the pandemic? Well, at the moment, the Common App has given space for a student to specifically write about the challenges that are faced due to the pandemic. Um, and so I think that's a spot that can go there. Um, However, I would say that you want to make sure that each aspect of the application reflects you in a different way. So since there is already space in the Common App to write specifically about due to the pandemic, I think it's like 250 words that they give you. I would recommend to keep all pandemic related things in that essay and not necessarily focus that on the Common App as well. Secondly, I think the pandemic has affected everyone in some way, and so I think if you make the decision to write about the pandemic in your Common App, I think it's important that the way in which you were affected was more significant than the way that kind of mostly everyone has been affected. So, for example, um, kind of everyone is taking online classes in New York City or New York State, um, so on and so forth. And so, I think you want to make sure that when you think about challenges that are related to the pandemic, they are they're not so routine as kind of what unfortunately we are used to now as the new normal, if that makes sense. Um, The third prompt is reflect on a time when you questioned or challenged a belief or idea. What prompted your thinking? What was the outcome? So I think this prompt is kind of similar to the ones in the past where they have delineated questions in a way to sort of guide you as you write your essay. So essentially, they're asking you to do three things: reflect, think about what really started that reflection, and finally, ask yourself what was the outcome of that reflection. And so, something that I think is important is that when you read this type of prompt, I think it can seem a little bit overwhelming at first. Like, what does it really mean to question or challenge a belief or idea? Um, and what does it look like to do that? But I think that that's something that we all have experienced. It's just really about thinking whether or not we have experienced that. So, for example, um, I'm sure we all can think of a time when we questioned someone or didn't necessarily believe something that someone said, and that can be something that can be completely applicable um, to the prompt without necessarily being something extremely significant. So, for example, you can question or challenge a belief or idea about whether or not remote learning is working for you or whether or not remote learning is a good idea. You can question or challenge a belief about so many different things, but they don't necessarily need to be extremely great in magnitude. So it doesn't need to be a question. You don't need to question or challenge a belief that has been thought of everyone as true. It can be something that is quite simple and probably even minuscule in its significance, but as long as it's important to you and you're able to explain why and you're able to write well about it, that's really the key. Um, Question four, reflect on something that someone has done for you that has made you happy or thankful in a surprising way. How has this gratitude affected or motivated you? Um, so again, this is something that you don't necessarily need to have a extremely large event to talk about. I think it's kind of the smaller things that the best essays are the ones where the smaller moments of your life are made to seem extremely significant and impactful. And so, for example, if I were to respond to this essay, I don't need to think about something that's, someone did something for me that was over the moon or something that costs them like $1,000. Something that I immediately thought of when I read this prompt just now was a day in my high school when I was really tired and I was going home, and the buses were extremely crowded, and the bus driver was closing the doors on on the travelers, and someone basically got out of the bus and gave me their spot to like essentially go home. And that was something that really was where I really felt happy or thankful, because that person just saved me like half an hour to possibly even an hour on my commute. And I think something like that I can definitely make into an essay, and I can answer this entire prompt with just that extremely small experience that probably didn't even last a minute. So obviously this gratitude affected me and affected my entire day. But it also motivated me because I really realized that the small acts of kindness do really go a long way in helping people feel better just about their day or just about themselves. Um, and I can reflect on this action because it's definitely an action that wasn't expected and was from a stranger. So I think it really does show a lot about kind of the human nature, or how human nature should be, regardless of whether or not you know someone or you don't know someone. I think everyone should make an effort to be kinder to one another. Um, and so that's a very simple moment of my life that I can use as an example for this essay. So again, what I'm trying to emphasize is that these essays do not need to be extremely um, superfluous. They do not need to be littered with vocabulary that does not make um, sense to most people. They just need to be a truthful reflection of your experiences. Prompt 5: discuss an accomplishment, event, or realization that sparked a period of personal growth and a new understanding of yourself or others. So again, as you can see, they're kind of giving you almost a structure that you can adapt for this type of question. So they're giving you the option of choosing an accomplishment, an event, or a realization that sparked a period of personal growth. So again, I think in the Common App, there are many ways that you can fall into the trap of being cliche. So a student might think, oh, an accomplishment that I can write about is, the fact that I got into the honor society, or the fact um, that I got this award. And I think those things are really not what make the most memorable essays, because they're not necessarily unique. Um, and again, they can be reflected on other aspects of your application. So your resume or your activity section of the Common App can discuss these types of things. And so it's not worth wasting your word count and wasting the opportunity to really stand out from everyone else in the Common App. So again, I would steer away from things that are typical of applicants, and I would really focus on things that are individual to you as a person. And I really like to think of the Common App as a story. Think about a story or a time in your life or an experience. So veering away from the notion of academics and institutions, and looking more inwards about yourself and what you enjoy and what has been important to you. Um, Number 6: describe a topic, idea, or concept you find so engaging that it makes you lose all track of time. Why does it captivate you? What or who do you learn when you want to learn more? So I think, again, similarly to number 5, this is the essay prompt that is very prone for students to make cliche. I am sure that so many students pick an academic topic or academic idea or academic concept, and they may think that finding the most difficult idea or difficult concept in whatever subject, physics or math or chemistry, is going to be appealing, or it's going to give them an edge when someone's reading their Common App. And again, that's an extremely narrow perspective of the admissions officer. Again, the process is extremely holistic, and it's much better to describe something and explain something that you're passionate about, that you genuinely care about. For example, when I read this prompt, the first thing that I think of that I find engaging is cooking. And that's something that I can, again, write a Common App about, because it's something that genuinely matters to me, and it's also something that also still shows my skills. Obviously it takes different skills are utilized in different types of talents or concepts or ideas or topics. Someone who is someone who's into dancing has specific talents, and someone who's into music has specific talents. So things that are really genuine are the best common app essays to write about. And number 7, share an essay that share an essay on any topic of your choice. It can be one you've already written, one that responds to different prompts, or one of your own design. So again, this is an extremely open-ended prompt that is really asking you to do whatever you want. And I think that's exactly what they want you to do whatever you want, but I would just make it clear that the reader knows what direction you're taking. So if you're responding to a different prompt or designing your own prompt, I would just make that extremely clear in the actual essay. Um, Similar, what I this may be variable, but what I would not necessarily recommend is simply copying and pasting an old essay. You want to make sure that this common app still reflects something about you, and it's not just like an academic essay that you're copying and pasting from another class about a different topic, or about, it's like it shouldn't be a history paper, it shouldn't be like a science paper. You want to make sure that it's doing the job of showing the reader about who you are and what you are interested in. um, so with that, we've gone through the um, common app prompts. So I quickly wanted to again just give everyone a minute to ask any questions before we go through some examples of personal essays. So I'll just give everyone a minute. If you have any questions, this would be about the prompts, or if you have any general common app questions, this would be a great time to ask them. And then from there, we can go through 2 examples of common app essays. Okay. It seems like no one has a question, but we can we can go through these prompts then. So again, as I mentioned, if you choose prompt number 7, where you are creating your own prompt, just make clear what prompt it is that you are doing and what the actual prompt is. So this is a student that I worked with, and she made up her own prompt, which was describe a place or environment where you are perfectly content. What do you do or experience there, and why is it meaningful to you? So I would first like everyone to kind of notice the way in which she designed or wrote out her prompt. It's very similar to the way that the Common App has written out their own prompts. So it kind of tells tells the reader what she's going to do, and then also leaves an open-ended question of what or why. And that's really similar to what they do. So if you go to prompt 6 is very similar to the prompt that the student chose. And I think that is good because it doesn't really throw anyone off in the sense that it doesn't sound extremely random or extremely off topic. Rather, it sounds exactly the way it should. It sounds professional. It sounds like something that will give the reader information on the student. But obviously, the student has indicated that this is their own individual unique prompt. So with that, I'm gonna go through the rest of the essay and kind of pick out what makes this a good Common App essay. Um, so the first paragraph says, I trudged through the water in my ginormous waders. Carrying an 8-foot long turtle trap, my friends and I made our way to the shore. As we peered into the greenish waters, I spied 2 eyes looking back at me. So the first thing is that this essay begins in the present moment, which is always a great way to catch a reader's attention. And it's also extremely visual and depictive. So, the reader has set the setting immediately in the first paragraph, which is an extremely um, useful tool as for writers to engage their readers. That's the first thing that I wanted to mention. Secondly, the reader then starts talking, but very naturally starts talking about what the setting represents. So she uses dialogue, which is also a good way to further provide context on the setting and background, but she uses dialogue very limitedly. And she uses dialogue to essentially indicate that she's with a group, and that group represents her science research members from her science research mentoring program. So notice the writer could have started by just introducing the science research program and talking about what she does and who's in her group, but rather she takes a more visual and creative approach where she's first describing her experience. And again, that's the most key part. You want to ensure that your experience is centered in the common app. Secondly, the writer uses descriptive language that's not cliche. So, as we brought the trap onto the dirty dirt, I placed my hand next to the snapping turtle, holding it like a sandwich, its head facing away from my fingers. This is a visual description that is not cliche. So there are some phrases that, kind of everyone uses, and they're extremely overused um, in the English language. So, these cliches um, include like kind of cheesy quotes or kind of overused phrases or idioms in the English language. So, if I were to think of a cliche right now, you know, things that people say, like the grass is always greener on the other side, or you can't judge a book by its cover, even though these, like, these ideas or these thoughts aren't necessarily wrong, they just sound um so overused and so like cheesy and corny that it kind of takes away seriousness from a reader, from a writer, and it doesn't sound unique anymore. So whereas this student kind of uses a unique way to describe this experience that she's experiencing, which is um catching a turtle. um so that's another example of things that you want to make sure. You want to make sure you're using descriptive language that's not also riddled with cliches. um, then the student makes a transition. So something that I generally want to point out is that the student's paragraphs are structured in an extremely sophisticated way. They're not overly long, and they have logistical transitions. So the first paragraph starts off with her experience in this setting. Following that, she then begins to introduce where she is and who else she is with, which is a science research mentoring researchers. Then she gives a another transition that is away from the experience of catching turtles and more so about friendship a friendship experience about bonding with members of her research team. And following that, she then transitions again into what the trip means. And this is kind of more so of a um, reflection paragraph. So earlier on, she's telling the reader and showing the reader what this experience is. And then finally, she goes on to actually reflecting on it through this transition sentence. So the sentence says, during this week long excursion, part of this trip, I experienced, during a week long excursion, I experienced an unforgettable trip and met like minded people. Then she goes on to talk more about the program, and but she doesn't only focus on the program. She talks about what this program meant for her. And what it meant for her was that she was a city kid who was deprived of nature, and this program gave her the opportunity to experience that. And this thus inspired her and gave her the motivation and ambition to really explore science and the intersections between science and art. So, as you can see, again, the focus is not on the program, the focus is not on um, really what she did as part of her research team. The focus is on what this program means to her. And it means many things that you can tell. It means the ability for her to gain friendships, the ability for her to go through this experience of working with turtles directly, and it gave her this experience of immersing herself in nature. Following on, she then talks about reflecting further on this program and the feeling of really belonging. So she talks about her personal struggles with feeling like an outsider and living in a community where she never really felt accepted, whether that was her high school or her local neighborhood. And she talks about and reflects um, on her experiences in these specific institutions. Um, but at the same time, she has this positive outlook that is demonstrated by the research group that she's involved in. So she explains the difficulty and a part of her life that kind of upset her or was difficult for her, but she also talks about moving past that. And that's also something that's extremely important. Um, Always want to make sure that you have this notion of growth and um, pursuing something that will put you in a better position than where you are now. So she talks about the fact that she had difficulty bonding with others that really shared her interests, but this program is what really encouraged her and cultivated her skills and her interests as well. And she then kind of talks about tangible skills that the program gave her, such as leadership, improving confidence, and appreciating nature. So, again, while this isn't kind of a list of her skills that can be found on her resume, she's able to reflect on her experience and show how her experience impacted her and affected her in a positive way. And she does that in a very sophisticated and natural style. And she really ends by, again, on a futuristic note, which I think is always nice, where she's applying how this experience will continue to impact her in the future, and she hopes to continuously um, immerse herself in concepts and disciplines that embark her onto new endeavors. So this was kind of the first example that I wanted to show everyone, because it's extremely simple, and it uses a academic enrichment program or academic extracurricular, but the focus is still on the student. The focus is still on what she herself gained from the program, what her experiences were there, and why they're important to her. It's not focusing on the actual program or the logistics of it, or really what the program did for her academically. It's a lot more personal, and it's talking about her feeling of belonging um, and her involvement in the program. So um, with that first essay, I just wanted to give everyone a chance. Again, if they have any questions, feel free to drop it in the chat as well. Um, if not, we can progress onto the um, second common up. So the second common app. So this was actually a common app that I had worked with much earlier in the past, and so the questions are slightly different, but they're still similar. So this question is: tell us a time about when you use your inner resources to overcome an obstacle. What did you learn? So this is kind of very similar to the most recent prompt, which is the lessons we take from obstacles we encounter can be fundamental to later success. Recount a time when you faced a challenge, setback, or failure. How did it affect you, and what did you learn from the experience? So again, the prompts are similar in that they're really, again, making sure the student realizes the focus is on the student. It's not on the obstacle. It's on how you use your resources to overcome an obstacle. And again, this obstacle does not need to be something that's extremely um concrete, or it doesn't need to be like a physical obstacle or an academic obstacle. The interpretation of the obstacle is really broad, and it can really be anything that you think you had trouble with throughout your life. So kind of going through this prompt, um, the sentence starts off by saying, "My family and I have a profound hate for snow, and for good reason." So again, it's kind of immediately setting a tone, setting a setting, giving you just enough to get you interested, but not enough such that you know the entire prompt. Um, or you know the entire prompt that the reader will be saying in the essay. So this is kind of a hook that you can give to the reader to have them interested. Um, and then again, the reader goes to focus on the settings. So they talk about the timestamp. So a blizzard in 2013 left us stranded in a car in the middle of the George Washington Bridge for 3 hours, if not more. Again, setting a scene, setting a it's like telling a story. And you can't tell a story without telling the readers where you are in the story or what you're doing. So again, it's very descriptive. Matters seemed bleak as the vehicle had come dangerously close to running out of gas, and there was a lack of snow, food, and water. The sky continuously poured innumerable smooth snowflakes that accumulated on the ground. Panic ensued as weather conditions worsened, and the neon gas tank in the car's tank slowly dwindled. So, again, you're showing and not telling, and you're using complex sentence structure to ensure that your writing has a flow and voice to it. You're not You want to experiment with different forms of punctuation such as commas, semicolons, colons to really make your writing go to the next level with the structure that it has. And also you want to make sure that you're setting a scene, so rather than just saying we are running out of gas, the student gives an image: the neon gas tank in the car, the neon gas needle in the car slowly dwindled. So again, it's really um, descriptive in that nature. Um, then the reader again gives a transition. So they end off by saying, "As this torture continued, I realized I needed to get help." And then they start the next paragraph by mentioning dialing 911. So there's a logical transition that brings you from one set of the scene to the other. Um, and then again, the reader is continuously ensuring the focus is on them and their actions. I dialed the phone. I hung up. I told my dad to shut off the car. Um, and so on and so forth. So again, the focus is really on the student and the person who's writing the essay. Um, and it's still very natural though. The student is not necessarily using language that's extremely complicated, you know, not really exaggerating the severity of the situation, but describing it in a way that is engaging. Trekking through the snow, I opened the trunk of the car, engulfed by heavy gusts of wind and surrounded by blankets of snow. So again, there's a focus on description, there's a focus on setting the scene. Um, I threw a few clothes at my parents and sisters and left some for myself, and instructed everyone to wear as much as possible. I wrapped socks and scarves around the necks and hands of my youngest sister and clasped her palms in my hand to provide her warmth. So again, rather than the subject of the sentence being the sister and explaining that the sister was cold or the sister didn't feel well, it's about me. What did I do in this moment? Um, And then again, there's a transition. In the moment, my family and I shifted our focus from the predicament, and we eventually fell into sleep. Following, there's an again logical transition. So you're ending off with sleeping, and then you're going to the next morning. So again, there's a logical transition in terms of chronology, where the writer is taking you from one scene to the other, but it's not abrupt and it's well explained. The next morning, we were grateful for the fact that we had survived the previous night and had woke up to the moving traffic. Again, the use of the M dash is making the language seem more sophisticated and the writing having a flow. Again, here is the use of the colon. So ensuring that there is variety in your sentence structure will really help your essay seem more sophisticated as well. And this paragraph is really key because it's the conclusion, and you want to make sure that your conclusion again is reflecting the prompt. So the next morning, we were grateful for the fact that we had survived the previous night and had woken up to move in traffic. The sequence of events had undermined the stereotypical family roles that I had grown accommodated to, and I myself adopted a parental role, and as the situation called for me to be a leader, not necessarily of a group of people, but of the situation itself. Then again, this is really a lot of reflection happening here. By taking command of the circumstances, I provided myself hope that if I can take charge of whatever comes my way, not only can I bring myself out of an ordeal, but I can do unscathed. So essentially, the reader is indicating that they use their inner resources to overcome an obstacle, and through that, they learn that by using these inner resources themselves, they can overcome an obstacle, no matter how big or how small. But again, they used a specific story to explain that and to answer that question. So it was not simply um, answering the prompt, but it's using a story and a part of your life to answer the prompt. So with that, these were the two common apps that I wanted to go over, and we also went through all the prompts. Um, and I just wanted to take a moment to we reserve some time for Q&A. So if anyone has a question or has anything that they want to ask, feel free to drop it in the chat now. Someone asked, when do you recommend to start writing the essay? I definitely think you need to be experienced and developed as a writer. And so I definitely would recommend I think the summer of your junior year, I think is a good time to start not necessarily even writing, but planning. I think that is really what takes the longest. Really structuring out your ideas, thinking about what prompts interest you, thinking about what prompts you could write about, and really experimenting with not just one, but probably a few different prompts and seeing what you think um, you can write about. I think when I was writing, going through this process 4 years ago, I picked out kind of two prompts and kind of wrote a common app for each, and then went with the one that I felt better about. So I think you should definitely give yourself time. I don't think this is something that should be rushed. I think that is going to be asking you for a lot when it's due, because it's simply just unnecessary stress that you don't need to take. So I would recommend starting early. In the late summer of your junior year, I think is a good time to start planning and brainstorming about ideas. No problem. But if anyone else doesn't have any questions, we reserved extra time to kind of answer anyone's questions. But if no one has any questions, then that was all I had planned for today. So if you don't have any questions, you can feel free to leave the meeting, but I can definitely hang out for a minute or two more to answer any questions that anyone may have. So, um, good luck to all of you, um, whether you're writing your Common App or helping someone else or are the parent for someone who is writing it. Someone asked, what is the personal statement for college? And the personal statement is, in essence, kind of the essay that is sent out to all schools that you are applying to. And the personal statement is essentially a essay um, is an essay that answers a specific prompt, and the goal of that prompt is to inform readers about who you are. So it's essentially a written statement that you write as an applicant to indicate to a college or university or graduate school, in this case it would be college, to just tell the reader about you, and supporting your application. And it's really also a chance for you to, in a creative and unique way, talk about your experiences and your background. Does anyone else have any questions? Um, Thank you everyone for coming out. And if you have any additional questions, or if you need assistance in this process, I know I definitely did. And I had so many people read my essays, give feedback on them. I think Queller Prep is really a amazing resource for that as well. We have many tutors who are excellent in writing and who have gone through this process not only for college but also for um, multiple higher education. So if no one else has any questions, then um, we can end the meeting here. Alrighty. I'm just gonna give it a last round. If you don't have any questions, feel free to leave the meeting. But if you do, I'm more than happy to help. If you also have any questions, you can reach out to Frances as well. She can also give you my contact if you would like to discuss anything in regards to Townsend Harris or Barnard. Um, and if no one has any other questions, then I think I've given it a few minutes, and so I can end the meeting now. Thank you so much for coming out. Today's session was really on focusing on writing the personal statement and Common App. And we went through all of the Common App essay prompts, along with going through 2 examples of Common App essays that really stand out and why they stand out. And so if no one has any questions, I'm going to end the meeting now. Thank you so much and have a great night.